Hello and welcome to the Sod Pod, our first episode for the 2026 season. We hope everyone had a lovely Christmas and a new year and managed to recoup a bit before things start to pick up again with calving season. I suppose this year we've decided to change up the Sod Pod a little bit. You are going to hear from us every 2 weeks now rather than once a month, and you might also hear a few different voices on the podcast as well throughout the year. Today you're listening to myself, Clodagh Bolger, and I'm joined with Peter Linden and John Brennan also. Today we're going to discuss all things slurry dates, soil sampling and stocking rates, referring to a few regulation changes as well. So Peter and John, how are you keeping?
All good, Clodagh.
Very good. John, I might jump to you first there on the slurry dates. So I suppose, look, some slurry application dates are open, I suppose, with Zone C and Zone D opening on the 1st of February. But I suppose, look, conditions at the moment aren't the most ideal, particularly here in the southwest. We've had a lot of rainfall. But I suppose, what is the general, I suppose, advice when spreading slurry in springtime?
Yeah, thanks, Clodagh. I suppose when we talk about slurry, we're talking about recycling nutrients on farm. Slurry is known for its good source of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, but at this time of year in early spring, it's the nitrogen which is the most important nutrient for driving on growth rates this time of year. When we're talking about slurry and applying it, especially this time of year, the 3 R's really come into play. So you're spread at the right place, the right rate and the right time. As you said there yourself, conditions have been very poor in January. We've been getting a lot of rain. You want to make sure that conditions are right when you're going out with slurry, to avoid losing nutrients to nearby waterways, to the environment, and you don't want to be losing those valuable organic nutrients from your slurry. In terms of application rates, this time of year or early spring, whenever you're allowed to spread and the conditions allow, an application rate of about 1,500 to 2,000 gallons per acre in the first round, pending conditions, is advisable. Just look at a few figures there in pasture base there this morning. At present, typically 1,000 gallons of slurry at 6% dry matter to grass is equivalent to a 50 kilogram bag of fertilizer valued at 9,532 in terms of nutrient composition. And this is the value that when it's applied with using less slurry spreading equipment. So just to put an economic figure on that, that's worth about €29 per 1,000 gallons. So I suppose being wise and using your slurry efficiently as possible is very important, I suppose, economically as well on farm. And it's just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, you talked about like the methods there, John. Like I suppose probably a lot of that is down to really in terms of looking at it from a nitrogen point of view. Like I suppose the P&K isn't really going to change in that sense. You know, whether you go, splash plate or less, and obviously look, the majority of farms now are all, I suppose, by regulation subject to apply with your low emission slurry spreading, but it's more from the nitrogen point of view, really, isn't it? Like you're targeting your cooler, drier days, which is why it's typically, I suppose, always kind of the best practice to put it, spread it up front in that sort of February to April period. And like, I suppose something to add in that too, it'd be like the P&K content to be, worth looking at as well, and particularly when, I suppose, we're doing a lot in soil samples at the minute, where farmers are being, what would you say, they don't, I suppose, have the same limits, or they're a bit tightly restricted in terms of how much P they can apply. It's important probably not to forget about that as well, is it?
Yeah, 100%. It's the nitrogen that drives it on. This time of year, I suppose, in terms of picking what fields to go out and spread slurry on, the ones that are drier is first of all, and then maybe some fields that have been grazed last there in 2025 can be a good target as well. And you touched on there the P&K value of slurry. I suppose when you think about your silage ground as well later in the year, it's important to save some slurry for those zones as well, and not to use it all up early in the spring, because I suppose 75% of the value of slurry is its P&K.
Thanks. You were mentioning as well there earlier, John, just to touch off it while we're on the topic about buffer zones.
Yeah, exactly. Something very important to bear in mind as well. A 10-metre buffer zone for 2 weeks after the open date near waterways needs to be adhered to. Very important, I suppose, in our drive to become more sustainable and environmentally friendly with our nutrients, and I suppose to protect water quality and things like that. So that's just something to note as well if you're a contractor or a farmer going out spreading slurry as well. But yeah, that's just a bit on slurry. good practice as well, if you can at all, is to test your slurry. Quantity and quality of slurry varies a lot farm to farm, depending on, I suppose, what type of animals you have, what type of diets you're feeding as well. So if you can at all, if you can test your slurry, it's a very good practice. I know our nutrient management plan has a facility there that, and other probably nutrient management plans out there, that you can actually input the results of your slurry analysis onto the planner, and you can kind of get a good idea of what your nutrient application rates are on farm in terms of your organic manures as well. So that's just something interesting and it's good practice. And when you talk about slurry as well, interestingly, there's a certain amount of sulfur in it as well. Not all available. There's also some magnesium, calcium, sodium also in slurry as well. So that's all helping the ground to drive on more grass. And I suppose any fields that are out there that are worn and all that, slurry is a great job for feeding the microbes in the soil because there's a good quantity of carbon in it as well. So slurry, very important nutrient, or a very important nutrient source to work with.
And with the pea, like you mentioned there about, or the meal feeding of the animals, like I suppose when you look I suppose into the regulations in a bit more detail in terms of how the planners work, like that's why I suppose we need to know, I suppose, it's important to factor in how much pea is fed on the farm, or much meal, I should say, is fed on the farm, because ultimately that will inflate the amount of phosphorus that's in the slurry. So even if, look at you don't get the slurry tested, but you have, I suppose, a shed or a tank there that, is animals that's on a relatively high meal diet, it will be a higher pea content, and like looking, I suppose, to try and target that, target that to put maybe soils that need the pea or the K, like your lower index soils, your index 1, index 2, where you have a bit of a building. Even if you're not that technical in terms of looking at exactly at the NPK content, just something as simple as that, using it a bit more strategically, can, I suppose, help where you're going to get more response out of it, really.
Yeah, 100%. And look, spring, I suppose when the conditions are right, spring is a great time to go out with your slurry. Conditions are not too hot, they're nice and cool and I suppose moist. Days are starting to get longer, the soils are warming up. I think they were about 5 degrees there last week, so they are getting up towards that 6 degree mark, and conditions are improving the whole time. So slurry is definitely something to consider.
Yeah, that's really good advice, lads. Even there with testing the slurry, like it's not overly expensive to get your slurry tested, and at least then you can convert it into your kilos per hectare or units to see what you're working with, when you're doing out your nutrient management plan. But I suppose, look, Peter and John, you just kind of briefly mentioned there about soil sampling. So I suppose, look, there's a lot of soil sampling going on this time of the year. I suppose, look, really, it's not rocket science, I suppose, when we're taking a soil sample, but there are a couple of things, that you need to think about maybe before you go out soil sampling, and a few maybe changes to regulation as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the new requirements that came in there last year on the 15th September 2025 is that all soil samples must be labelled with a georeference location or LIPIS ID number on the sample. This is, I suppose, the department just brought it in to kind of get more information on a soil sample, and I suppose to improve, I suppose, the level of accuracy and the level of integrity behind the soil sample result. That's been brought in, and I suppose the penalty if you don't have that done is that your P index will automatically be defaulted to an index 4. So it's an important thing to do. So that's just, I suppose, one of the big changes. Typically November, December, January are your most common times to do your soil sampling. And I suppose on a previous episode there, we talked about the importance of taking a good representative sample, because when you go to the time and effort and you spend all that money on your soil samples, it's important to do it right. A soil sample will do up to 4 years, so that's a lot of nutrient management planning. When you think of it, it's a lot of fertiliser bought, a lot of nutrient applied under the results of your soil sample. So taking a good sample correctly, getting your W across the field, taking enough cores as well to get a representative sample, getting it off the lab good and quick, avoiding kind of areas that are heavily pushed like ring feeders, water troughs, and going out when conditions are good as well. I know we touched on already that conditions are poor there at the moment, there's a lot of rainfall. It's not ideal to go out and soil sample a field that is waterlogged or extremely wet, because it can be a difficult task, as you might know. So there's just a few things to consider as well. A soil sample can do up to a maximum of 5 hectares. It depends on the farm as well. Like some people might I suppose, like more precise analysis done, maybe field by field, and all of that, maybe depending on your enterprise. But they're just things to kind of consider.
And just on that point as well, John, you were saying not to soil sample on a waterlogged soil, you know, like, because you're not bringing up the cores, I suppose. Like, it's very important, I suppose, to get an accurate depth of a sample as well. Why is that so important?
Yeah, look, you're I suppose for a grassland point of view, you want to get down the 10 centimetres soil depth with your core, because that's where, I suppose, the root mat layer of your grass is. That's where all the activities happen in terms of nutrient uptake by the plant. So you want to test, I suppose, the fertility level in that area in terms of its pK and pH. And a couple of other important points to consider as well is when you last applied organic or chemical P and K. So the general advice is you must wait 3 to 6 months from your last application of P and K, both chemical and organic. And on liming as well, the advice is to wait up to 2 years as well from your last lime application. So they're just things to consider as well, because you want to get a soil sample result that's a true reflection of your field as well. And you don't want kind of inflated values as well, because if you're going out too soon after nutrient application, your soil result is going to show up that you're high in, for example, phosphorus, and then you won't have your I suppose your true phosphorus allowance then on your nutrient management plan. So it can have a big effect on your farm's nutrient management plan for up to 4 years, as we were saying there.
Yeah. Right.
The one I would say, just I suppose, where some farmers are surprised, or maybe I'm going to say unaware, so I'm generally speaking here, like, but the organic matter, I suppose, you know, that rule there that catches farms where, you know, if they're zoned in this high organic matter area, that you're automatically defaulted to index 3 unless you prove otherwise. So like, it's always one to just watch, you know, we would see ourselves there before we go out. You know, the majority of the farm, you have 90-95% of the farm sound, but then there could be just some, you know, proportion, some corner of the farm that's falling into this. And just, I suppose, it's very important that you have, that you do sample that for the organic matter test. And ultimately, I suppose, if it comes back on less than 20%, you know, it's not deemed your peat soil, so it's back to your mineral soil applications where you can get away with your index 1 or 2, wherever the actual soil result comes back. So it's just something else to be aware of.
Yeah. 100%. And even just to bring it back to that new regulation, John, that you went through there, you know, it's important, I suppose, with whoever's taking our samples, whether it's yourself or whether you have someone contracted in to do it, that they have that facility to be able to pull those georeference figures. I know here in Grassland Agro, when we go and take out soil samples, our app is able to accommodate for that as well, in case any farmers are wondering. I suppose moving on there to the stocking rates part, I know, Peter, you were at a couple of conferences and stuff there at the start of January, and I know stocking rates was a big topic there, especially with the new regulation that's after coming in there for 2026.
Yeah, so I suppose, look at it as part of the Nitrates, look at it, it's changing on an ongoing basis. You know, as farmers will be aware, you know, over the last number of years we've seen cuts to the overall chemical in we can apply. Well, I suppose this time round, it's not so much not a direct cut as such, which I suppose is reassuring. You know, I suppose ultimately, if we're to, I suppose, continue to be, I suppose, have our farms, you know, run in a profitable manner, or in terms of, you know, being able to grow and utilise significant tons of feed, obviously we need to be able to apply, you know, our chemical in an efficient way to match, you know, our growth responses. And I suppose the big rule change here now is that it's going to differ, I suppose, but to I suppose summarise it really is that if you, on your milking platform ground now, if you want to be able to continue spreading your typical rates of N that you've been applying in the past, you now have to account for some of that slurry to be exported off the milking platform onto maybe outblocks that's not your milking platform, which is the likes of your silage ground or your dry stock ground. So depending on where you fall from a stocking rate point of view will determine, I suppose, how much you actually have to export. And I suppose when I'm talking about exporting, you know, we automatically think that this is off my farm to another farm. But this is all within the one, I suppose, herd number. So it's all within the farm that we're talking with. So it's really just about, while the farmer may actually already be doing it, making sure that it's accounted for on the department AM system now. And typically that's you'll have a 4-day window to notify the department of this. And it's really, I suppose, as I said, there's not a direct cut as such, but it's more about the redistribution at of nutrients at farm level.
Very good. And just as you say there, you're referring to the milking platform. What is the definition of a milking platform? What kind of land, I suppose, falls into that area?
Well, I suppose when we look at the rules, it's basically anything within a 3-kilometre radius of the milking platform that is obviously accessible by cows. And I suppose when we talk about the dairy cow, that's both dry cows and milking cows that would be factored in. So like when you look on the likes of your ICBF report, you will always obviously see an average there of the cows you're milking, but when you look at the dry ones as well, it's important that they too obviously will inflate your organic in, they're classed in that same category obviously. And I suppose where that'll be factored in, I suppose the thinking or I suppose from initial, what would you say, communications from the department, it'll be when you're doing the base application there. Probably that's only around the corner now as we get into March, April and May. There'll be a figure there or a facility online to declare the milking platform area. And ultimately then that will be used for the department to verify how exactly your milking platform is stocked.
Perfect. And just, I suppose, conscious of farmers that might be listening to the podcast, I suppose, is there any specific example that you could go through for listeners?
Yeah, like there's one there that kind of, I suppose, to get me own. It took a wee bit of sitting down and figuring out, I suppose, in terms of trying to see all the different scenarios and whatnot. And I suppose the one thing I would say is that it's definitely not kind of applicable to a one-size-fits-all in terms of, well, if farmer A is stocked to 3 cows per hectare and they don't have to export slurry, it doesn't mean to say farmer B stocked at a similar, I suppose, number of cows per hectare does actually have to. You have different variables there in terms of the banding comes into it. Whether you're a band 1, band 2, band 3 cows. Obviously your band 1 cow producing less than 4,500 kilos of milk is equivalent to 80 kilos of nitrogen per cow, whereas if you go up to the top band, that's up to 106. That's going to have an effect on it. It depends whether you're in derogation or not, where that'll ultimately have a knock-on effect on where your whole farm chemical allowance is, and then what your milking platform land area is. And I suppose when you get back to the example, I suppose, like if you take 100 cows in band 2, I'm choosing band 2, just it's probably the most common band in ROI. On a 30 hectare milking platform, stocked, I think that's just a little over 3 cows, maybe 3.3 cows per milking platform hectare. If you're wanting to do, I suppose, business as usual in terms of applying your usual chemical nitrogen rates, the rules there are stating that there's about 40 kilos of organic nitrogen to be spread on the outblocks or off the milking platform. But when you do the calculations, that's equivalent to roughly 110,000 gallons of slurry. And just say, for example, you have 30 acres of silage ground, that comes to about a little over 3,600 gallons of slurry. So realistically, if the farm's taking 2 cuts of silage off that ground, they're doing that anyway. If you're going out with 2 cuts of silage, after you're following with 2,000 gallons of slurry on each application, they're 4 there going straight away. So, I suppose it's when whoever does your allowances, be it your advisor, grassland, agro, whoever it is, or maybe you sit down and walk through it yourself, when you look at it on that basis, I would think the majority of farms are probably doing it anyway in terms of redistribution of nutrients. But now, I suppose, it's important to be aware that it has to be, I suppose, documented or notified to the department.
Yes, perfect. I suppose one of the most important things is, to ask for clarity on it, as you say, whoever you're dealing with, your advisor or someone in grass and agro, and we'll be able to help you out on that. I suppose, look, we've talked through a lot of good information there, and it's all very valuable and relevant, I suppose, this time of the year. Is there any final thoughts there, Peter or John, or any words of wisdom?
Really, for me now, Clodagh, I'd just like to wish all our listeners the best for 2026 and hope it's a good, successful year for you.
Peter?
I suppose now, like most everyone else, we're sort of hoping for a turn in the weather, Clodagh, and we can actually try and get on with the business in terms of, being able to travel the ground and whatnot. So, like everyone else, I'm living in hope at the minute.
That's it. The weather dictates all at the end of the day. I suppose for myself, just best of luck to everyone who's starting calving season there. I know a lot of farmers have started already, but just hope everything goes well. I suppose until the next episode, we'll keep James Freeman's tradition going Farm smart, farm safe.